There are moments in life when a quiet question begins to echo inside a person, a question that doesn't come from fear or ambition, but from exhaustion. How long can I continue living disconnected from the abundance I know I was meant to experience? This whisper appears most often in the stillness of early mornings or in the heavy silence of long nights, when the world seems distant and the heart no longer sabe como pedir ayuda. It is in these hidden places within the human experience that the journey toward true abundance begins, not as a race, not as a demand, but as a return to something ancient and deeply familiar. Today, I invite you into a different kind of exploration, one shaped not by techniques alone, but by presence, reflection, and the recognition of everything that has brought you to this exact moment. This video is not a collection of promises or shortcuts. It is a path, one designed to reconnect you with the deeper currents of your own consciousness, where energy, intention, and spiritual alignment merge into what many call the quantum field of abundance. As we walk through each chapter together, you will be guided to understand why your attempts to manifest may have felt incomplete, where your energy has been unintentionally divided, and how to reclaim the inner coherence that mentes verdaderamente prosperous cultivam. Before we continue, take one breath, a slow, grounded breath, and let it remind you that transformation begins gently, quietly, and from within. There is a moment in a person's life when the familiar weight of stagnation becomes more than a passing discomfort. It becomes a quiet ache, a kind of internal soil that no longer produces the fruits it once promised. That ache begins subtly, often disguised as frustration with small routines or an unexplainable heaviness during ordinary days. Yet beneath these surface-level irritations lies something much deeper, the unspoken awareness that life has drifted into a space of repetition where nothing feels lost, but nothing feels gained either. This is the landscape where many people find themselves long before they realize they are yearning for a reconnection with abundance, not merely in a financial sense, but in the essential sense of feeling alive again. For countless individuals, this dissonance grows quietly. They show up for work, tend to responsibilities, fulfill family roles, and outwardly appear stable, but internally they endure an expanding gap between who they are and who they sense they could be. This disconnect is not superficial, it is existential. Many adults reach a stage where the external world loses its color, where achievements no longer soothe, and where the heart feels strangely out of place in the rhythm of everyday life. The absence of meaning becomes more noticeable than the presence of routine. This is why so many seek answers through spirituality and personal transformation. They are not searching for miracles, they are searching for themselves. At the heart of this chapter lies a truth seldom acknowledged. Abundance cannot enter a life that has become numb. When a person forgets how to feel, the universe has difficulty finding where to meet them. Abundance thrives where the inner world is receptive, awake, present. Yet many have spent years suppressing their emotions to survive hardship or to maintain social roles that no longer reflect their inner reality. Without noticing, they began to negotiate away pieces of their own aliveness. They silenced their intuition, ignored their inner signals, and allowed life to unfold more in reaction than intention. Over time, this creates a state where the person is physically present but spiritually absent. The longing for transformation arises when the heart grows tired of silence. It is not a desire for wealth alone, but a desire to return to the feeling of being connected to something larger than the small orbit of daily concerns. People want to feel guided, supported, understood by forces that operate beyond the physical world. They want to feel that their existence has weight and meaning in the vastness of the universe. This yearning is not weakness, it is the first sign of awakening. When the inner world becomes hungry for something more, it is because the spiritual self is preparing to re-emerge. Yet the journey toward abundance requires an honest encounter with the emotional ruins that many try to outrun. Inside almost every adult lies an accumulation of unprocessed stories. The fear from childhood moments, when love felt uncertain, the pain of betrayals that left permanent shadows, the heaviness of disappointments that reshaped their beliefs about what they deserve. These experiences carve deep patterns into the subconscious, influencing how a person sees themselves long after the memory has faded. The subconscious does not forget. It stores every emotional imprint and uses these imprints to filter how a person interprets the world. This is why so many struggle to manifest abundance despite sincere effort. They speak of possibility with their conscious mind, but carry memories of limitation in their body. They try to visualize prosperity while their nervous system remains conditioned to expect loss. There is a profound conflict between what they want and what their history has trained them to anticipate. Abundance cannot fully flow into a vessel that leaks energy through unresolved emotional wounds. The universe responds not to words, but to the deeper vibration of lived experience. And yet, even within these wounds, abundance is not absent. The path to it begins with acknowledging where the self has been fractured. There is a sacredness in noticing the very places that feel most uncertain. When someone gives honest attention to the parts of themselves they have long avoided, a subtle shift occurs. The spiritual field around them begins to soften, as though the universe recognizes their willingness to step out of hiding. True manifestation does not begin with demand, it begins with remembrance. Before a person can claim abundance, they must reclaim themselves. The journey also requires understanding that stagnation is not failure, it is communication. The universe often becomes silent when a person has stopped listening to their own truth. That silence is not punishment. It is an invitation. It is a space created for the soul to hear its own voice again. In this stillness, the individual begins to sense what they have ignored, desires that were postponed, dreams abandoned because of fear, parts of their identity that were softened to make others comfortable. This recognition is painful for many, yet it marks the exact point where transformation becomes possible. Every human being reaches a moment when the old self feels too small to contain the weight of their untapped potential. When someone senses this, they are not breaking, they are unfolding. The patterns that once kept them safe no longer fit the life they are meant to live, and in this discomfort, a new frequency begins to emerge. A person does not rise into abundance through force, but through realignment. They learn to sit with their vulnerability, to witness their emotional landscape without judgment, and to sense the places where fear still governs their decisions. This inward honesty creates a clearing, a kind of spiritual opening through which new energy can finally enter. Here, at the threshold between who you have been and who you are becoming, the universe waits, not with demands, but with presence. It is from this place that abundance starts to move toward you, subtly at first as intuitive nudges, unexpected clarity, or a renewed sense of purpose. These are not coincidences, they are responses. When your inner world begins to rise from stagnation into awareness, the field of abundance begins to rise with you. In this quiet collaboration between your consciousness and the universe, a new life starts to take shape, one in which you are no longer surviving your days, but participating in them with depth, intention, and alignment. There comes a time when a person begins to sense that the obstacles in their path are not merely external circumstances, but internal echoes. These echoes often originate from memories that never found resolution, from expectations inherited unconsciously, or from moments of emotional collapse that were quickly buried to keep life moving. Yet nothing buried remains quiet forever. The energy stored within those unresolved moments slowly gathers weight, shaping how a person perceives themselves and the world around them. This chapter delves into that inner terrain, not to expose wounds for the sake of pain, but to reveal the silent architecture that influences how abundance is received or rejected. Many individuals think they are seeking prosperity, but what they are truly seeking is relief. Relief from the constant tension of feeling behind in life, from the fear of not having enough time to become who they imagined, and from the haunting suspicion that abundance might be reserved only for people who learned something they did not. These fears are rarely spoken aloud. They live beneath the surface, manifesting as hesitation when opportunities appear, doubt when something good begins to unfold, or a sense of unworthiness when life becomes too quiet or too generous. Without noticing, the person becomes conditioned to brace for disappointment, even when joy is possible. The human mind is remarkably adaptive, and the emotional body even more so. When someone spends years living in survival mode, they begin to normalize the very patterns that once caused them pain. They internalize a belief that struggle is familiar and therefore safe, while abundance feels unpredictable and therefore dangerous. This is one of the most profound forms of unconscious sabotage. The nervous system clings to what it knows, even if what it knows is scarcity. In this state, abundance is not rejected consciously. It is rejected somatically, as if the body itself cannot hold the vibration of possibility without trembling. This disconnect becomes especially visible during moments of transition. When something promising enters a person's life, a new relationship, a financial opportunity, a chance for reinvention, it often triggers not excitement, but fear. Fear of losing it, fear of not being able to maintain it, fear of being seen in a new light and having to abandon old versions of themselves. In these moments, it becomes clear that abundance is not merely about what we want, it is about what we have learned to tolerate emotionally. The heart longs for expansion, but the subconscious clings to the familiarity of limitation. To truly understand abundance, it is necessary to explore how a person learned to interpret life's fluctuations. Some grew up in homes where resources were unpredictable, where financial instability shaped their sense of safety. Others were raised in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, forcing them to silence their needs, desires, and dreams. And many experienced loss at formative ages, leading them to associate hope with vulnerability. These early patterns do not remain confined to childhood. They follow a person into adulthood, shaping the very frequency with which they approach the universe. When an individual carries these imprints, they often approach spirituality with a mix of longing and skepticism. They want to believe that the universe supports them, yet their history has trained them to expect abandonment or inconsistency. This internal contradiction creates a subtle resistance to abundance, as if receiving too much would violate some hidden rule about who they are allowed to become. This resistance does not appear as self-sabotage in the obvious sense. It appears as hesitation, overthinking, procrastination, self-doubt, or the inability to stay consistent with intentions that once brought them hope. These behaviors are not failures, they are symptoms of unresolved emotional contracts with the past. The truth is that abundance becomes accessible only when a person begins to renegotiate these internal contracts, not by force, but through awareness. When someone starts to observe the moments they shrink when life expands, or the moments they question blessings they prayed for, something begins to shift. They realize that the universe is not withholding abundance, they are withholding their ability to receive it. This realization is not meant to induce guilt, it is meant to spark recognition. Recognition that their resistance was once a protective mechanism, designed to shield them from further disappointment. The moment they acknowledge this, the pattern begins to soften. The journey into abundance often begins with an intimate encounter with silence. Silence has a way of revealing what noise once concealed. In that stillness, a person can finally hear their deeper fears without judgment. They may notice a fear of being seen, a fear of outgrowing the life they built around survival, a fear of stepping into a version of themselves that others may not recognize. These fears are real, and they carry emotional weight. But within these fears lies the doorway to authenticity, and authenticity is the foundation of all true abundance. As the inner world becomes more honest, the outer world begins to respond differently. People often imagine abundance as something that arrives from beyond, as if the universe suddenly decides to favor them. But abundance is more subtle. It begins within, in the way a person speaks to themselves during moments of doubt, in the way they hold their emotions during difficult transitions, in the way they honor their own boundaries after years of self-abandonment. Abundance is not external generosity alone. It is internal permission. Here a new understanding begins to form. The universe does not reward perfection. It responds to coherence. It responds to a person who is willing to align their inner landscape with the life they wish to create. This alignment is not an act of willpower. It is a process of returning to the self. When someone senses the places where they have been fragmented, when they begin to reclaim the parts of themselves they once silenced, they naturally shift into a frequency where abundance can finally find them. This chapter marks the first step into that return, not through demands but through remembrance. Remembrance that abundance is not an external acquisition, but a state of being that emerges when the inner world becomes spacious enough to receive. When that spaciousness begins to form even subtly, the universe responds, not through dramatic events but through gentle openings, synchronicities, and pathways that begin to unfold with quiet precision. And from those openings, a new life starts to take shape, one that reflects not the wounds of the past but the possibilities that have always waited patiently beneath them. There comes a stage in every seeker's journey when the familiar boundaries of the self begin to shift. This shift is rarely dramatic at first. It starts quietly, often as a subtle discomfort with long-held habits, or as a gentle awareness that certain emotional patterns no longer feel aligned with who the person is becoming. This inner movement marks the beginning of a deeper awakening, one that does not rush to the surface, but unfolds gradually, as though the soul is reorienting itself toward a new frequency of living. It is within this inner recalibration that the field of abundance begins to reveal its true nature. Abundance is often misunderstood as a reward for effort or a prize for discipline. Yet in truth, abundance emerges from a state of inner coherence, a harmony between what a person feels, believes, and embodies. Many spend years chasing external outcomes while overlooking the subtle disharmony within their emotional and energetic systems. This disharmony is not a fault. It is a residue left by past experiences that shaped how a person learned to protect themselves. When someone has lived through loss, instability, emotional neglect, or disappointment, they naturally develop ways of shielding their deepest layers. What they do not always realize is that these same protective mechanisms can restrict the flow of abundance just as much as they once protected the heart. To understand this, one must observe the moments when life presents an opening. Sometimes it appears as an unexpected conversation, an intuitive nudge, or an opportunity that surfaces without warning. Yet, rather than stepping toward it with openness, many respond with hesitation. This hesitation is not lack of desire. It is the echo of old fears resurfacing. It is the subconscious whispering familiar warnings that once kept them safe. Do not hope too much. Do not trust too quickly. Do not expand too far. These whispers carry the weight of memory, not truth, yet they influence how a person receives the invitations life offers. The greatest barrier to abundance is not external difficulty, but the internalized belief that expansion is unsafe. This belief forms slowly, often through years of subtle disappointment or emotional strain. Over time, it becomes a quiet expectation that good things are temporary or conditional. In this state, abundance is not rejected consciously. It is anticipated as fleeting. The nervous system learns to contract, even when the heart longs to open. This contraction becomes habitual, shaping how a person interprets their experiences, how they view themselves, and how they relate to possibility. There is a profound turning point when someone begins to recognize this pattern. It often arises in a moment of unexpected stillness, when the familiar noise of life fades just enough for deeper awareness to surface. Within this silence, the person begins to sense that the fear of expansion is not their true nature. Rather, it is an inherited pattern, formed long before they had the language or maturity to understand it. This realization carries immense power because it reveals that abundance is not something to be attained, but something to be allowed. Allowing abundance requires the softening of inner resistance, not through force but through understanding. As this understanding deepens, a new relationship with the self begins to form. A person starts to notice the places where they diminish themselves, where they apologize for their desires, where they shrink to maintain harmony, or where they silence their intuition to avoid discomfort. These subtle gestures point to the parts of the self that have been conditioned to expect less. Recognizing them is not a sign of inadequacy, it is a profound act of awakening. Each recognition becomes a quiet permission to step out of old narratives and into a more expansive version of the self. This process mirrors the cycles found in nature. Just as the earth moves through seasons of growth and rest, the human spirit also moves through cycles of contraction and expansion. Contraction is not a mistake. It is a spiritual winter that prepares the roots for deeper growth. Many misinterpret these seasons of internal withdrawal as failure, not realizing that clarity often grows best in darkness. When a person learns to honor both the rise and the fall of their inner energy, they begin to live in greater harmony with themselves. This harmony becomes the foundation for abundance to take root. The field of abundance responds not to perfection, but to authenticity. It responds to the moment when someone stops pretending to be unaffected by their past and instead embraces their emotional landscape with honesty. This honesty creates a grounding force that stabilizes the energy body. When a person meets their fears with presence rather than avoidance, their frequency shifts. The shift is subtle yet unmistakable. It is the difference between living in reaction and living in alignment. Alignment does not eliminate doubt or uncertainty, but it repositions the self as a conscious participant in its own evolution. As this alignment strengthens, the universe begins to feel less distant. Signals that once went unnoticed start to surface clearly. The person begins to sense that life is not acting against them, but responding to them. They feel guided by a presence that cannot be seen, yet can be felt in the sincerity of intuition, in the clarity that arrives during moments of stillness, and in the quiet confidence that begins to replace old fears. This expanding sensitivity is not imagination. It is the natural result of living in resonance with the deeper truth of one's own being. In this state, abundance becomes less about receiving things and more about becoming someone who can hold them. It becomes about living with a deeper sense of trust, recognizing that the universe is not asking for struggle, but for alignment. The person begins to understand that abundance flows when they stop negotiating with their worth and start embodying their truth. It is a transformation that unfolds gently yet steadily, as though guided by a current stronger than individual will. This chapter marks a significant passage in the journey, the passage from resistance to receptivity. To reach this place is to stand at the edge of a new way of being, one in which abundance is no longer pursued, but welcomed. As the inner world becomes spacious enough to receive, the outer world begins to reflect that openness. It is here, in the quiet shift from contraction to expansion, that the path toward true abundance begins to reveal itself with clarity. There are moments in a person's life when the familiar walls of routine begin to feel too small for the magnitude of their inner longing. This often happens quietly, long before they admit it to themselves. They notice it in the way certain conversations lose their emotional resonance, or in the way their body tightens when they imagine repeating the same choices for another decade. It is a subtle but unmistakable sign that the soul is stirring, inviting them into a deeper understanding of who they truly are beneath the layers of habit and expectation. In these early tremors of awakening, the field of abundance begins to make itself known. Abundance is not merely a state of receiving, it is a state of remembering that life is not supposed to feel like a constant negotiation between desire and limitation. Many adults spend their lives trying to maintain balance between responsibilities and dreams, often sacrificing their inner vitality in the process. The heaviness they feel is not from lack of potential, but from the accumulation of years spent suppressing the fullness of who they are. When someone begins to sense that they have outgrown the version of themselves built in survival mode, they are touching the beginning of a profound transformation. This transformation begins with awareness. Not the awareness that comes from intellectual understanding, but the one that rises slowly from the body, from the places where fear, grief, and old disappointments have been stored. These emotional imprints form the subconscious architecture that dictates how a person interprets abundance. For those who have lived through scarcity, whether emotional, financial, or relational, abundance can feel unnatural, even destabilizing. They may want expansion, yet feel threatened by it. They may crave opportunities, yet question their readiness to receive them. This contradiction lives deep within the energetic field and is often the reason many feel stuck despite their efforts toward change. To sense these internal contradictions is a sign of growth. It is the moment when a person realizes that abundance is not withheld by the universe, but filtered through the narratives they still carry. These narratives are not intentional barriers. They are emotional residues of a time when self-protection was necessary. Each fear, each doubt, and each hesitation reveals a chapter of the past that shaped the person's sense of safety. As long as these chapters remain unread, abundance has nowhere to settle. It cannot enter a life that still operates on the belief that expansion is dangerous. Yet even within these layers of resistance, there is a quiet intelligence at work. The soul does not rush the process of awakening. It waits for the moment when the person is ready to witness their own truth without collapsing into shame or blame. This witnessing marks the beginning of inner alignment. Alignment is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to no longer be governed by it. It is the recognition that the self once built for protection no longer serves the life that is now calling. As alignment deepens, something remarkable begins to happen. The world around the person starts to shift, not because the universe has suddenly changed, but because their perception has expanded. They begin to notice subtle moments of support, small synchronicities, intuitive insights, unexpected clarity. What once felt random now feels connected. What once felt like silence now feels like communication. These moments are the early signs that the person is stepping into a new energetic posture, one where they are no longer bracing against life, but slowly opening to it. This opening is delicate. It often coexists with waves of doubt, especially for those who have spent years feeling disconnected from their own inner wisdom. But doubt does not negate progress. In fact, doubt often emerges precisely when the old identity begins to dissolve, making room for a more expansive version of self. The person begins to sense that abundance is not something distant, but something woven into the very fabric of existence. It is not granted, it is recognized. Recognition becomes the turning point. It is the moment when someone sees that abundance has always been near, appearing in the form of resilience during difficult times, unexpected help from those who cared, moments of intuition that redirected their path, or even the quiet strength that carried them through periods of uncertainty. These experiences are not random. They are evidence of a deeper connection that has always supported them, even when they felt alone. This shift in perception creates a new inner landscape. The person begins to release the belief that they must earn abundance through struggle or worthiness through perfection. They begin to understand that abundance responds to authenticity, not performance. This authenticity is not about revealing everything to the world, but about becoming honest with themselves. Honest about their desires, honest about their fears, honest about the ways they have abandoned their own needs to meet expectations that were never aligned with their soul. When this honesty becomes a way of being, the energetic field around the person stabilizes. It no longer fluctuates between hope and fear, longing and avoidance. Instead, it becomes a steady expression of inner truth. And in this steadiness, abundance finds a home. It is drawn to coherence the way light is drawn to open space. It enters quietly, often through small yet meaningful shifts, clarity in decisions, renewed emotional strength, deeper intuitive knowing, gentle opportunities that arrive with perfect timing. In this chapter of the journey, a person begins to realize that abundance is not an external destination, but an internal readiness. It does not appear when life becomes perfect, but when the inner world becomes spacious enough to welcome it. It is here, in the quiet unfolding of authenticity, that the true field of abundance begins to reveal itself, not as a promise, but as a presence. As this journey approaches its closing, a quiet realization begins to surface. Abundance was never something waiting in the distance, hidden behind years of effort or luck. Abundance was always woven into the very fabric of your inner life, quietly responding to every shift in your awareness, every moment of honesty, every breath in which you allowed yourself to be fully present. What has unfolded here is not a method or a promise, but a remembering, a gentle return to the truth that the universe has always been in conversation with you, even when you believed you were moving through life alone. Throughout this exploration, you walked through the landscape of your own emotional history, recognizing how long-buried patterns shaped your relationship with possibility. You witnessed the moments where the heart contracted out of fear, not because you were weak, but because you once needed protection. You saw the ways in which your perception of yourself influenced your ability to welcome expansion, and you began to understand that abundance is not a distant gift, but a state of inner coherence where your thoughts, emotions, and intentions align in quiet harmony. This alignment does not demand perfection. It asks only for presence. And now, as the final words settle, a new clarity emerges. The life you long for is not created through force or urgency, but through a steady return to truth. When you honor your own depth, the universe responds. When you release the identity built around survival, the energy of abundance can finally take root. And when you choose to live in resonance with your authentic self, the path ahead reveals itself with a grace you no longer need to chase. What awaits you beyond this moment is not an ending, but a beginning shaped by awareness, grounded in intention, and illuminated by the quiet certainty that you are no longer walking against your own spirit. You are walking with it. Before this video comes to a close, there is one question that echoes more deeply than any other. What part of your life is still waiting for you to return to it with honesty, courage, and presence? The answer to that question holds the exact doorway to the abundance you seek. It is not found in the world outside, but in the subtle truth you have been carrying within you all along. If this message resonated with the quiet place inside you that longs for alignment, connection, and transformation, then allow this journey to continue. Subscribe to this channel so you can keep expanding in conversations that honor your depth, your healing, and your spiritual awakening. Your presence here matters more than you know. And now, as you move forward, continue watching the video on the screen. Let the next step unfold. The path is still opening before you.